the actual physical music for the thing was not publicly available in any way, shape, or form. Mozart went and listened to it, went home and wrote it down. He's an extreme case, but that kind of skill was valued, was fostered.
Was trained. Yeah.
And to the extent it could be trained, it was trained. So, early Baroque, not the Renaissance, not the late Baroque, early Baroque.
Were there, in the early, well, in 1632, in the U.S., there probably weren't a lot of musical instruments either, if there weren't.
At the high school.
At the high school.
The high school, it's canon that they had a full marching band,
Okay.
which means they pretty much had the instrumentation for a full symphonic band.
Okay.
Because in USA high school music programs, marching band is the fall and symphonic band is
This is
the
the
spring.
winter, yeah, spring. Does that preclude strings, or how many?
It is canon because it is canon. There is no orchestra in Mannington, in Grantville, because Mannington did not have a string program.
Right. So it's
Which
mostly brass and woodwinds.
Yeah.
But there are strings in string players in
Yeah,
the town.
there are
Right.
some violin players in town. There is no orchestra program.
Right.
There's not going to be any cellos laying in somebody's attic.
There's pianos in some people's houses. There might be an electric organ in someone's house.
Probably more.
Yes, sir.
They're in all the churches. they
Jazz
have-
bands, any garage bands, you know,
It's
whatever.
it's canon that there was at least one garage band. It's canon that there was at least one old school
Big
bluegrass
band, big
group.
yeah.
It's also inevitable that there are that the string players that exist will have some of that collection of sheet music, you know, and so
Right.
there is a miscellaneous collection of sheet music, but there's going to
Here
be
and there.
vastly more recorded music.
Now you've got me really thinking, because
Good.
in the second Father Vaughn's feast story, I have him interrupted by an assassin as he's rehearsing a transcribed version of Godspell.
Well, I can see
Cool.
that.
And I really want to know what that would sound like.
Okay, the thing to remember about music in this culture, it is the primary entertainment medium for the entire culture.
Right.
Everybody does music. Everybody can whistle, everybody can hum, maybe not well, but they can do it. Everybody sings a little bit in church. Every time there's a fair day, every time there's a market day, there's a couple of guys over in the corner of the market tootling on a pipe and strumming, maybe strumming on a lute, maybe banging a hand drum, but there's some kind of music going on.
And dancing.
Always dancing. This is the primary entertainment medium. This is big. You were not considered to be an educated person if you did not have an understanding of music. If you did not know the philosophy of Pythagoras about music and the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle about music, you were not an educated, cultured person.
Just to give you a kind of example, a few weeks ago, a touring musician named Mike Westendorf came our way with some stuff that he had just composed and was doing it to an audience at our church, which naturally consisted mostly of Lutherans. You know, this was stuff that nobody had seen, nobody had ever heard before. He had produced it within the last couple of weeks, and he sang a melodic line and asked the audience to sing it back to him, which they did in 4-part harmony. And he said, "I gotta love you guys." But they are, so conditioned to singing stuff in 4-part harmony that they hear a melody and they repeat it, each person in his or her own
And the church music of the time, the chorales of the time, are very predictable.
Very predictable.
They move in a certain way, they move in certain patterns, and that's the music that people relate to. That's where they get.
What names? Who are the big composers of the time? Who are the rock stars? Because I don't know.
Nobody you've ever heard of.
That's what I wanted to know. I've
There are,
heard of some.
Probably the biggest Italian composer who was alive at the time is Claudio Monteverdi in Venice.
At least we've heard of him.
We've heard of him. What's his name? Frescobaldi, who is in the Baltic War. And Giacomo Carissimi, who is the hero of Enrico Toro's Euterpe stories. Those are probably the three closest to well-known Italian composers of the time. Giovanni Gabrieli died probably half a generation before this point.
But his music is.
Yeah, the music's still there. In Germany, Samuel Scheidt, Heinrich Schütz, and forgive me, Virginia, if I butchered the German.
That's right.
You've been doing fine. Yeah.
Schütz is one of my characters. Nobody has grabbed Scheidt. There are some others, but those are probably the two more well-known. I think Michael Pretorius died just a few years before 1632. He would have been a big name.
Von Spee was one of the most popular hymn composers of the time.
Okay.
And nobody sings any of his hymns.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, they do. They're in the Lutheran hymn.
Oh yes, they do.
Gosh darn it.
Yeah.
There are a half dozen
Are there a half
different
dozen?
hymns in the Lutheran.
I've got to see that.
The Lutherans are of the opinion it does not matter. If that's a good hymn,
If it's not
their
broke,
hymn.
don't take it out of the book.
There's just no hers.
Okay.
Just
So, even 100 years.
Actually, no, there were all sorts of female composers.
No, he was making a pun.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
A very bad one.
Guys, my voice is not real strong today between the allergy season and the secondhand smoke. I can't talk over everybody, so bear with me. Okay, just as an example, 100 years later, Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, was not only played the flute, he played it well and wrote music for the flute that is still performed today. So that's kind of the level of musical knowledge that the educated people have, but even in the streets, people sang, people played things, people danced at the fairs.
They
Music
danced
was
for
a big
everything.
part of the life. And that's why what comes back is going to have an impact. But you have to think in terms of what did they listen to versus what came back, and start making value judgments on how quickly are things going to be adopted. Not everybody liked the same kind of music. Performers at the fairs and the taverns tended to play simpler songs. The music of the nobility, the music of the high prelates' churches would tend to be more elaborate, more formal. Virginia just loaned me a book about flame wars within the Lutheran Church, about formal, simple singing versus elaborate music, and the fear that the elaborate music would distract people from worshiping God and get them more focused on the sound of the music. Now, by the way, those same flame wars are still happening in Protestant churches today. That has not been resolved. Oddly enough, the Calvinists seem to come down on the side of the elaborate music rather than the simple music, which surprised me. That is not what I would have considered the intuitive response. So the church would have some of the simpler music in the hymns and chorales and the choral responses, but they would also have more elaborate music. And there would be cross-fertilization. There was a French tune that went by the name of L'Homme Armé, which meant the armed man, or basically the soldier. somehow, for some reason, some French composer back around 1300 or so latched on to that secular tune and made it the basis for a mass. And once he started it, it seemed like at least one composer in every generation that followed wrote a mass based on this drinking song,
Which was very familiar to everybody.
which was familiar at the time. Nobody knows it today, but it was familiar at the time. And I think the last composer that actually wrote a mass based on it may have been Carissimi in the 1600s. So there was some cross-fertilization, but it was different. But even today, unless you're a really geeky musician, you don't walk around whistling the theme from Bach's Art of Fugue. I do, but not many other people do. The music that people whistle, the music that people hum and sing when they're having fun tends to be the simpler stuff. Okay. So we're bringing almost 400 years of musical development in American and European musical tradition back to 1631. And how do people react? So I'm going to start off with some vocal music from the time, just to give you a flavor of the kind of thing that they used to listen to.
All hail to the days that madden more praise than all the rest of the year, and welcome the nights that double delights as well for the poor as the peer. Sweet blessings attend each merry man's friend, their job but the best that he may, forgetting all wrongs with poems and songs to drive the cold winter away.
Okay, very simple, very straightforward, simple melody, simple harmony, simple rhythm, 2/4. What's the quote from American Bandstand? Simple, got a good melody, you can dance
Got a
to
good
it.
beat, you can dance to it.
Yeah, that's what
It
it
was
had.
definitely a dance tune.
Next one.
Fortune, my foe, why dost thou frown on me? And will thy favors never better be? Wilt thou, I say, forever breed my pain? And wilt thou not restore my joys again?
First one was in 2/4, this one's in 4/4, but again, very, very straightforward, simple melody, simple rhythm, simple harmony. Everybody in this room could learn to sing that in 5 minutes and walk out of here whistling and singing the song. Again, danceable. This third one, the first two were anonymous, but they are historic. They're from around 1600. They are English, so they would be perhaps a little different from some of the music on the continent, but not a lot. This is pretty common sound to the music of the street music at the time. This third one was actually written by John Dowland, a man who had been a court composer in England, had been very well known. This is not the greatest recorded